Hey, welcome back, seniors. You're now moving on to the beginning of the first real unit. So you've wrapped up your senior narrative essays. Hopefully you're planning on using those to apply to college, university, or even a scholarship. A lot of these do overlap with different scholarship prompts. Right now, what I'm going to do though is just walk you through really the motivation and the thinking behind your first unit. This first unit includes a little mini project and reading and examining 2 short stories. We typically get this done in, I think we're scheduled for a couple months on this, but really it's fun and it's actually really applicable because we're talking about colonization. So that might be a term you recognize from history, social studies, and you might be thinking like, okay, like what does that have to do with English class? Does that even still show up? Because that's something we learned about when we talked about the 1700s and Europe going and colonizing North and South America and Africa and different parts of Asia and Oceania. Well, turns out when you have big historical events, they shape the world that you look around and you see today. So yeah, it's pretty important. And we're going to look specifically at how that impacts the different stories that get told today. And part of that might even be your own story. So you can see just a couple pictures here to kind of get us thinking about colonization. And we already talked about this, think about how colonization, which if you need a quick reminder, it's a power exerting their power on a smaller power. And typically not only that, but also moving in to that smaller power's location. So easy example is, okay, England moved over to the United States, mostly in the 1600s is when they started setting up colonies. And part of that was using militaristic force to displace the indigenous people here in the United States. And not only that, but then pull out the different resources from the United States to send back to England, right? Specifically, you might remember things like the triangle trade, textiles, and different raw goods. Why are we learning about this, especially in English class? Well, looking at power and power structures is one of the most important things we need to do as educated people. Who has control over information, other people, yourself, your lives, and breaking that down and understanding the motivations behind that and the reality of it is extremely important for being educated learners. And more so being able to think interdisciplinarily. What does that word mean? So if you are addressing something like, okay, yeah, hey, I'm interested in doing some research around climate change. Yeah, okay, let's talk about climate change. Well, you might think it's like, oh, maybe it's just a science thing, right? We're talking about, okay, this many liters of CO2 are in the atmosphere and you just do balance an equation and you solve it. No, but that's not the case. It's messy. We need to look at things like history. We need to look at things like geography. We need to look at things like philosophy, right? We need to look at things maybe like religion. We need to look at things like sociology, like psychology, like economics, right? And suddenly this issue like climate change, which, you know, on the surface sounds really sciencey, turns out to encapsulate, to include almost every other discipline there is. And climate change isn't the only thing like that. Just about every complicated idea or idea in general can be complicated in that way. Specifically, we're going to be looking at you making a presentation. Or I think there are a couple other options. I think you can make some memes. You can make, I think, a couple TikToks if that's kind of your forte, to explore the way colonization interacts with something you care about. You're going to be doing a little bit of research. So you're going to have to figure out, how can I communicate that effectively? And you're also going to have to be able to synthesize ideas. So take two different things, right? And see what they have in common. How do they interact with each other? How do they talk to each other, right? So that might be colonization and, hey, my favorite sport is soccer. Oh, suddenly these two seemingly different ideas might have a little bit to say to each other. And if you choose to do sports or soccer as your topic, you'll find out they might have a lot to say to each other. You'll know you're successful when you can convey nuanced, complicated ideas well, right? Again, whether through a presentation or one of the other options. This unit might challenge some of you. This might challenge you because you're having to think multidisciplinarily, right? Think about a lot of different ideas and come to a single conclusion about those. And maybe we're not used to that. It might challenge you because here in the United States, we are taught to believe certain things about our own country, and doing some research, you might find, hey, maybe that kind of pushes against some of the ideas I've had about this place I've grown up. Or maybe you already know about them. So it should be good, should be exciting, should be a lot of new learning. And the reason we're doing this is because the next two stories we're going to read, the first one, Interpreter of Maladies, takes place in India. And if you don't understand kind of the history of India a little bit and the legacy of the British occupation of India, it's not going to make a ton of sense, or you're not going to see the full picture clearly, because it explores things like gender dynamics, sexuality, the relationship between people indigenous to a country or people who leave the country and then maybe come back. And so it gets a little messy, a little complicated. So this is going to help kind of fill in those blanks. The second story we're going to read is called Which New Era Would That Be? It takes place in South Africa in the mid-20th century. There's a system of racism in place called apartheid, which you'll actually get to learn a lot about. Apartheid is really important to study because it was never actually abolished until, I believe, the late 90s. So it's extremely recent. And you'll get to explore a story that takes gender and race and colonization and class and social organizational structures and throws them all in a blender. And you're going to meet some really interesting characters, some characters you're not going to like for sure, but it's important. So that's about it for this unit. You'll do a little bit of writing with each of those short stories, but really this lens of colonization will hopefully take you beyond and deeper into your understanding of not only the world, but literature and everything that is important to you. So make sure you let your teacher know if you have any questions, concerns, and definitely have a good conversation about this. Have fun.